attributes in these schemes to determine if the practice is backed up by theory. To do this, we looked at a range of wine company assessment schemes for the practices and the publications of scientific research and other information such as GWRDC-funded regional benchmarking studies for the theory. We described the correlation of individual attributes with fruit and wine composition or wine score. However, one should keep in mind that correlation does not presume causation. The theme of the ASVO seminar in which I originally gave this presentation was objective measures of fruit and wine quality. Objective is defined as impartial, unbiased, or independent. And as you will learn, most of the vine attributes used for fruit grading are not particularly objective. If we look at the assessment schemes, there are many different types. They differ very greatly in their degree of complexity, in terms of the number of inspections throughout the season, but Veraison, the harvest inspection, is common to all, and they may be conducted by a viticulturist or a winemaker, or by both. At one extreme, we have what we can call the no-frills basic assessment schemes. This may comprise a pre-harvest assessment by a viticulturist. The winemaker may or may not participate. There may be up to 10 attributes which are recorded, such as vine balance or berry size. Not all of them may be used. Each attribute may be classified as good or average or less than average, and may be strongly benchmarked, usually within that region. And this will lead to allocation to one of 4 to 5 grades. At the other extreme, we can have assessment schemes that we can call all bells and whistles. And these may comprise inspections in winter, and again from between budburst to veraison, and again at veraison to harvest. The pre-harvest assessment may be done by both viticulturist and winemaker, and there may be 15 or more vine attributes and 7 or more berry attributes in these schemes. And some of these will have up to 5 categories. For example, for the berry deformability attribute, it may be classified as very soft, firm or hard. The data may be integrated to an iPad or something similar to end up with an overall score for grading. And you can refer to Island et al. 2011, the Grapevine, page 178, for an example of one of these assessment schemes. Now, the benefit of multi-attribute score sheets is that they provide an opportunity to integrate many vine characteristics. And this is desirable because use of one attribute alone is unlikely to be adequate for the purpose of fruit grading. Here's an example of a score sheet which is used by McWilliams Wines. McWilliams have score sheets which are variety specific, and this particular one is designed for Shiraz with a sprawling canopy in a region such as the Riverina in New South Wales. This scoring is done at the start of veraison in their case and leads to a score out of 100. And it has been modified from a version in Sunlight into Wine by Smart and Robinson in 1991. McWilliams have found by experience that the score that they can generate from this score sheet correlates well with their final wine grade. If I just go through this in a bit more detail, you can see, for example, that in terms of what they term vine balance, the highest score is achieved for a balanced canopy with dappled light. For leaf size, it is for slightly small leaves. And for leaf colour, it is for leaves which are green, healthy, slightly pale and dull. For berry size, it is for medium to small berries. For bunch exposure, they prefer about 30% in this particular environment. And for shoot length, as you can see, the shoot length, the desirable shoot length is medium. Then finally, for lateral growth, they prefer no laterals, which generates the highest score, and for actively growing shoot tips, it is less than 5%. So the total score is out of 100, as you can see. Now what I'm going to do is to talk about the vine characteristics of shoot which are used for fruit grading, and they can be put into these particular classes: vine balance, canopy microclimate, berry, which includes berry sensory assessment, BSA, also known as BSA, and disease and yield. Now in this presentation today, I'm only going to be covering those which are listed in bold. I'm not going to be covering disease, but if you're interested in knowing more about disease, you can find it on the more information about this in the paper, which will be in the ASVO seminar proceedings. So let's turn to vine balance first of all. Within this general category, we will find characteristics such as leaf area relative to fruit, the extent of growing fruit tips, main shoot length, extent of lateral shoot development, shoot lignification, and time of ripening. And I'll talk about most of these in some detail. In general, overall vine balance score is often used in assessment schemes. This is generally a visual integration of all characteristics. It's strongly benchmarked within the region, but there's no standard method that's used. A general vine balance score has been correlated with wine score in some of the regional benchmarking projects. For example, one in northeastern Victoria with Shiraz, and another for Pinot Noir in the Mornington Peninsula, also in Victoria. More specifically, if we look at leaf area relative to fruit weight, the relationship with wine quality is well documented, but it's almost never measured in practice because it's considered to be too time-consuming and too expensive. And it is generally only a visual assessment of leaf area to fruit weight. It's interesting that leaf area to fruit weight is strongly correlated with the fruit weight to pruning weight ratio. And fruit weight to pruning weight ratio is the best known quantitative assessment of vine balance. Five to 10 is considered to be optimal, but it's not possible, of course, to calculate fruit weight to pruning weight ratio during the pre-harvest inspection, but it would be useful to do so after the event to confirm a visual assessment of leaf area to fruit weight. I want to talk a little bit about some recent research that's been done by Nick Dokoazian and his group at Gallo in California. And what they did, they used bunch thinning about 3 weeks after fruit set to achieve 3 groups of vines, what they termed undercropped, balanced and overcropped, on Cabernet Sauvignon in the north coast of California. They measured fruit quality in this particular experiment. It was measured chemically and expressed as odor activity values for desirable dark fruits on the one hand and undesirable green fruits on the other. As fruit ripens, dark fruit value will increase and green value will decrease. And so eventually the fruit will get to a point at which the ratio is acceptable. They concluded from their research that a minimum ratio of dark fruit to green was 300. Now, as you can see, the balanced vines on here, which had a fruit weight to pruning weight ratio on average of 8 to 1, all achieved greater than that minimum ratio of dark fruit to green. And furthermore, they achieved this ratio at an average of about 24 bricks. The lowest was about 23 bricks and the highest was about 25 bricks. On the other hand, the undercrop vines, which had an average ratio of 3:1, only just achieved this minimum ratio, and on average they didn't achieve this minimum ratio until an average of about 28 bricks. The lowest was 26 bricks, the highest was about 29 bricks. And then finally the overcrop ones, which had an average ratio of 14:1, never achieved greater than this minimum ratio, and they averaged about 25.5 bricks. To look at this in a slightly different way, you can see that the balance vines, 8 to 12, had the highest levels of dark fruit odor activity value, and also had the lowest values of the green fruit odor activity value. Okay, the next vine balance attribute to look at is percentage of growing shoot tips. And the pictures here show an active shoot tip on the left and a shoot tip on the right which is almost stopped. So it's easy to assess this visually. The percent active shoot tips at veraison, also shoot length and the extent of lateral shoot growth, are all indicators of shoot vigor. Percent active shoot tips is used in many schemes. For example, in the McWilliams Shiraz scheme, you may recall that there were 6 categories ranging from less than 5%, close to 0, up to more than 50%. There has been some research on the direct relationship between shoot vigor and fruit quality, and there's good evidence that cessation of shoot growth by veraison is positively associated with wine quality. And this has come from both terroir studies and also from some benchmarking studies with both Pinot Noir and Shiraz. This particular attribute is easy to quantify, and it has the advantage that it can also be used for determination of vine water status and irrigation management during the growing season. The next attribute is the extent of lateral shoot development. This is, of course, another indicator of shoot vigor, and it has been negatively correlated with quality rating in some studies. It's also related to canopy density, and a high degree of leafiness, which would be attributed largely to lateral shoot development, has been correlated with low wine score for Shiraz in northeastern Victoria. Shoot lignification is often used in assessment schemes, but there are very few published studies to support its use. In one, however, wine grape value was positively correlated with shoot lignification at harvest for Shiraz in a number of vineyards from cool to hot regions in Australia. It has been used in regional benchmarking studies, and shoot lignification at veraison was positively correlated with wine score for both McLaren Vale Shiraz, Mornington Peninsula Pinot Noir, and northeastern Shiraz, Victorian Shiraz. Also, shoot lignification at veraison is correlated with other characteristics, for example, the percent growing shoot tips and seed maturity, shoot length, and canopy density. So overall, it is a very useful attribute to be used as an indication of vine balance. I'll now turn to the characteristics which make up canopy microclimate. And these can include leaf layer number in the bunch zone, shoot density, bunch density, proportion of exposed bunches, and proportion of exposed leaves. And I'll talk about some of these now. The benefits of an open canopy, a low proportion of shaded leaves, and so on are well understood. And of course they form the basis of modern canopy management. But it's generally only done as a visual assessment. It is rarely measured. In one study, there was a negative correlation found between leafy dense canopies with wine grape value. Looking at shoot and bunch density, this is used in some assessment schemes, and of course shoot spacing is related to canopy density. What we found is that bunch clumping is a common attribute or a common measure, not a measure but more an observation that's made in many assessment schemes. And it's interesting that seems to be a lot of emphasis on bunch clumping, but I've been unable to find any evidence to support its use, and I wonder whether or not it's related to disease issues, or is it used as an indirect index of canopy of shoot density, or for any other reason. And it'd be interesting to have some feedback on why bunch clumping is actually used so widely. In terms of bunch exposure, the positive influence of bunch exposure is well understood, and the proportion of exposed relative to shaded bunches is estimated in some schemes. However, there is by necessity a trade-off between optimal degree of bunch exposure for disease control and quality on the one hand, and avoidance of berry chemical damage and sunburn on the other hand. This will depend on climate, variety and end use. This requirement to achieve a balance between overexposure and underexposure of bunches is reflected in many assessment schemes and benchmarking studies. In terms of berry characteristics, berry tasting in the field is not new. Many of us are familiar with the sight of a winemaker pulling up in their vehicle, walking into the vineyard and picking a few bunches and a few berries from those bunches from a few end vines in a vineyard, chewing up the berries, spitting out the seeds, and then drawing a conclusion as to whether the fruit is good or not. However, formalized berry sensory assessment is a relatively new phenomenon and has been described in the reference that you can see on the screen. And it is now used in some assessment schemes. But it's interesting, there's been relatively little research on this formalized BSA, and most of it has been done quite recently. To give you some indication of some of the research that has been done, in some studies, BSA was positively correlated with juice composition and wine score, but in some cases only a few out of the 20 or so attributes were actually correlated, and those that were correlated the best include flesh maturity, astringency of pulp and skin, and seed and skin colour. Berry size is a very interesting one. It's usually just a visual assessment in many schemes. Rarely is it ever actually measured. So does it actually correlate negatively with wine score? Yes, in some studies it has been shown to negatively correlate with wine score. No, in many studies, many more studies, there is absolutely no correlation with wine score. And this is probably because environmental and cultural practices may affect skin development independently of pulp and thus can alter fruit and wine composition without any change in berry size. And this is very well documented in references such as that by Pony et al. 2009. And to support this, there are some benchmarking studies where there's been no correlation found between berry weight and size and wine score. So it's curious as to why there seems to be so much emphasis on berry size in some vineyard scoring schemes. Turning now to yield, yield limits are included in most contracts, and this is reasonable for vintage planning and so on. Now, we know that the majority of vineyards producing premium wine tend to have low yield, so it's assumed by some that low yield is indicative of good quality. Many wine companies use yield as a criterion for fruit grading, even though the weight of experimental evidence indicates that yield is not a reliable predictor of quality. And this is supported by some benchmarking studies as well. For example, yield and wine composition and score were not correlated in at least 2 of the benchmarking studies. So measures of vine balance are much more valid for fruit grading than yield alone, and so it is surprising that yield is still used as an important attribute in some vineyard scoring schemes. Can we do better? Precision viticulture techniques have been available for some time, so it's puzzling why they have not been adopted more widely in vineyard assessment to provide a greater degree of objectivity. Aerial imagery, for example, normalized difference vegetation index, NDVI or PCD, plant cell density, has demonstrated a strong relationship between vine vigor as termed by the precision viticulture people, and wine composition, particularly phenolics, across multiple sites and vintages. It is possible to generate NDVI maps that are sensitive to the variations of vertical leaf area index and gap fraction of the canopy, and they can now be created by ground-based devices. Point-and-shoot NIR, near-infrared spectroscopy, combined with GPS, can generate fruit composition maps and quality potential zones. And there was a recent paper on the on-the-go sensing of binary anthocyanin and concentration by a multiplex fluorescence-based non-contact handheld sensor, which could be used for field assessment. Now, even if this technology is not able to replace the standard vineyard assessment by scoring of vine attributes, at the very least it could be used to identify zones within a vineyard block to permit more accurate and representative sampling. So in conclusion, not surprisingly, wine producers are confident that their particular assessment scheme works for grading purposes. But are the growers convinced? Not necessarily. Growers want and deserve schemes that are fair, impartial and transparent. The theme of the ASVO seminar was objective measures. The majority of vine characteristics discussed in this presentation have some degree of subjectivity because they are influenced by both personal opinion and experience. Past performance of a block and predicted yield appear to be significant sources of bias. To be completely objective, vineyard assessment would have to be based entirely on some sort of robotic point-and-shoot device, and that is not likely in the short term. Even if not quantified in practice, many of the vine attributes commonly used in grading schemes are supported by the theory. Some of these attributes, such as shoot lignification and percent active shoot tips at veraison, should perhaps be included in all schemes because they can be readily quantified and they correlate well with the wine grade. Precision viticulture technology should be used more widely in the vineyard assessment process. There's also a glaring need for better sampling efficiency. Until such time that fruit grading is based solely on chemical measures of the fruit before or soon after crushing, vineyard assessment schemes will continue to be required for fruit streaming. A universal vineyard assessment scheme would be most advantageous for both growers and wine producers. However, even if we could develop a vineyard score sheet that's acceptable to all parties that could reliably predict wine grade, it would be useless if not combined with a representative sampling strategy. Finally, I wish to acknowledge the people who helped us in various ways in collecting information for this particular presentation, most of whom wish to remain anonymous. Thank you for listening, and it's now time to deal with any questions that you might have.